Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Herkimer Central School District's Return to School Forum. We're glad you could join us here this evening for this live stream event. This is Emily Popek. I'm the Communications Specialist with Herkimer Central School. And tonight we're going to be going over some of the things that we know now about the return to school for fall. We're going to be looking over some of the work that's been done up to this point to prepare for reopening. And that includes a review of some of the state guidance that we've received that is guiding our reopening plans. We do have a way for you to ask questions about the things we're going to be discussing here tonight. We have a link that you can click on our website where you can submit your question. And you can see that URL up at the top of your screen. That's slides.app, and you can read the rest of it there. If you type that into a new browser window, or again, you can go to herkimercsd.org and click through there to get a clickable link. And that's a way for you to ask some questions during this presentation. We're going to be taking those questions at the end of our presentation this evening, but you can type your questions in anytime, and we'll be reviewing those at the end of this evening's presentation. You can also, I encourage you to look and see what questions have already been submitted before you type in your own. There may be a question that already asks what the issue that you've been wondering about, and you can either upvote that response or just know that we'll be addressing those questions that you see when you click through to that screen. So again, you can type those questions in at any time during tonight's presentation. We will be answering those questions at the end of tonight's program. This presentation is also being recorded. For anyone who cannot join us live tonight, we will be sharing this video and also a summary of some of the issues that we're discussing here tonight on the district website within the next several days. So if you're joining us a little later in the presentation, if you know someone who wasn't able to tune in this evening, just know that there will be an opportunity to review this information at a later date. This isn't your only chance to hear the things we're going to be discussing here tonight. I do want to go over some of the guidelines for tonight's forum. So again, you can use the comment feature. That's that link up at the top of your screen to submit questions. We'll be going over those questions at the end of tonight's presentation. We do ask that you be courteous in your comments. Again, this event is being live streamed and recorded, and it will be available online following tonight's presentation for anyone who's not able to join us live. So there are several people here with us this evening who'll be going over some of the aspects of our reopening. We have Board of Education President Brian Crandall, Superintendent Robert J. Miller, Elementary Principal Renee Vogt, Elementary Assistant Principal and Athletic Director Christy Paraguay, Director of Student Programs Michelle Ploss, Middle School Principal Zachary Abbey, and High School Principal Mary Tomaso will all be here tonight speaking about the reopening process and taking any questions that might relate to the areas of the topics of reopening that may come up in our questions. So to give a brief outline of the presentation that we're going to have this evening, we're going to start off by recapping the reopening schools process. We'll be going over some of the state guidance that we've received up to this point. Obviously, that guidance is very extensive. There's a lot of detail here, but we do want to give an overview of some of the things that we know now about that guidance and how that's affecting our considerations for reopening school in the fall. We will then talk in more detail about the reopening process and plans that are being developed to this point. And when those presentations are complete, we will go to questions and answers. Again, if you're just joining us, there is a link where you can submit your questions during this presentation. You can see that link at the top of your screen that begins with slides.app. If you type that link into a new browser window, you will see a screen there where you can type in your question, and we'll be addressing those questions at the close of this evening's presentation after we've gone over some of the details that we want to share with you tonight. So I want to turn this over to our board president, Mr. Crandall, who's going to speak to us this evening about the reopening process that we have gone through thus far. So Mr. Crandall, please go ahead.
Thank you, Emily. I am Brian Crandall, the Board of Education President, and just talk about the reopening process that we've gone through so far. We had several reopening committee meetings through June and July. Those committees represented a broad variety of people from the school district. We had administrators, teachers, health professionals, school counselors, and board members were on the committees. And we had talked about the different ways that we could overcome some of the obstacles that we saw in the CDC and the SED guidelines. We sent out a parent survey in June and July, and we got back 350 to 400 responses to that, and that guided a lot of the committee's discussions. State guidance was given out and released on July 13th to the 17th. That was very comprehensive, 145-page guidance that was released to us. And we reviewed the survey results July 20th through the 27th. So tonight we have our reopening forum, July 27th. We need to have our reopening plan submitted to SED July 31st. So we're going to take the results from the forum tonight in a parent survey that goes out and formulate the rest of the reopening plans to submit to SED. And then somewhere between August 1st to August 7th, the governor will decide whether or not the schools can reopen. And then we will have the student intake process in August. So with that being said, I turn it over to you, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Crandall. Good evening, everyone. I want to take a moment to thank all staff that served on the regional and building level reopening committees, as well as community members and other stakeholders. We've been working hard together in this unprecedented time to make the best possible decisions for our schools, our staff, our community, and our students. Ultimately, we are driven by our mission to provide the best education possible in a manner which minimizes risk to staff and students and is as safe as is reasonably possible. With that said, I want to take you through some of the general terms, some of the state guidelines that have come out. As Mr. Crandall said, it is a 145-page document, but we'll boil down some of the important things. Face coverings will be required at all times on school grounds for staff and students, except while being instructing, or eating during such times. And during such times, social distancing must be maintained. Face coverings must be worn on school buses. The district plans a grab-and-go lunch system, which will minimize the amount of eating in school. There are some medical exceptions for face coverings, which may be accessed if necessary by students and staff. Medical exceptions will be reviewed and approved by the school health director. Social distancing, another term that you hear a lot about. It will be required whenever possible, and when not possible, face coverings will be worn. Classrooms will be designed to keep students and staff socially distanced. Face coverings are not required when socially distanced for instruction, but students and staff are encouraged to wear face coverings even during periods of instruction when possible. Mask breaks should be worked into the day, and proper social distancing must be maintained during any mask break. Performance-based music, such as chorus and band, require 12 feet of social distance to instruct in person, and this cannot be accomplished with staff and space constraints. Physical education likewise requires 12 feet of social distance to instruct, and it cannot be accomplished inside a school in person. As such, band, chorus, and physical education will be offered by remote instruction only until such time as social distancing guidelines are modified. All classrooms and entrances will be equipped with hand sanitizers. Staff and students will be trained in proper hygiene. The district has introduced new sanitation procedures and have purchased new disinfection equipment, as well as installed higher quality air filtration. Sanitation of high-touch surfaces will be more routine and thorough. All staff will complete a health screening and temperature check daily. Parents will affirm the health screening questionnaire each day that they send their children to school, which includes a temperature check. The school will also perform a temperature check on their child routinely. The district will have a system isolating sick children from their peers and protocols for sick children and staff to return to school and work in conjunction with the school health director, the Department of Health, and individual medical providers. Contact tracing is performed by the Department of Health. The school will cooperate with DOH in contact tracing investigations involving cases of COVID-19 which might occur in our schools. The district seeks to minimize the number of contacts that each teacher and student has at school. As previously stated, all students that ride the bus must wear a mask, with some limited medical exceptions. Students will sit one to a seat with the exception for members of the same household. The district will allow one pickup point in the morning and one drop-off point in the afternoon. There can be no changes to pickup or drop-off locations without at least a week's notice of the change to the district. And many of those things that I just talked about are fairly significant changes for families. Other reopening considerations. Most classrooms fit between 9 and 14 students with proper social distance. So each classroom will have about half the number of students it used to. Hence, we need about twice as many classrooms as in the past to have the students in school every day at the same quantity. Buses, which hold up to 66 elementary students in the past, may now hold between 22 and 28 mass students, depending on the number of students from the same household on each bus. We will encourage parents who can bring their children to school, although drop-off and pickups will be drive-through only, as we will discourage pedestrian visitation to schools. We will be reaching out to families soon to ask if you will need school bus transportation this coming school year. Our staffing capacity is designed for classes of about 20 to 25, with class size reduced to 10 to 14. This also creates constraints on the number of classes or number of times a student can be on campus. One effect from the above considerations, along with funding uncertainty, is the district has been forced to move to a virtual pre-K engagement program for the 2020-21 school year and will not have a full day pre-K program in the Herkimer Elementary building next year. Next slide. So our guiding principles in terms of designing our plan are to maximize in-person instruction opportunities for our youngest learners and those needing the most support, to support the academic and social and emotional physical well-being of all students and staff while following all state regulations. So this has been a fairly complex process to go through 140 pages of guidelines in about 2 weeks to get to something that we can submit at the end of the week. And all the principals and all the teachers that have been in on the committees and have been thinking about this have done a lot of work. And now I want to turn it over to Principal Vogt to discuss what this might look like at the elementary next year.
Good evening. As Mr. Miller stated, this is a very complex process, and we have spent countless hours trying to prep, plan, think about barriers, obstacles, trying to make sure that the safety is our first priority for our students and our staff as we bring them back to school in September. As he said, in adhering to the guidelines, our class sizes have to be much smaller. So at the elementary level next year, no class size will be any bigger than 14. So it's going to range from 12 to 14, depending on the grade level. We are going to do our very best to try to make it as normal as possible, because the main reasons why kids want to come to school is to eat lunch or go to gym or talk with their friends. And unfortunately, those things are not going to be able to happen. So what can we do to make learning fun, in addition to making sure they get a cohesive education? So the students will certainly continue to have their ELA, their math, their handwriting, technology, science, and social studies. We're going to be very creative how we do that. Some will be live streamed in. Every student will have contact time with a teacher throughout their 5-hour instructional day. We will certainly embed brain breaks, math breaks, as much quote unquote hands-on as we can while following the guidelines. We've been working very closely with primary teachers in ensuring that this can happen in a safe way. So whereas a lot of times in the past, kids have had a lot of choice, it's not really going to be as much choice as it's going to be this week. You might be assigned this center where that kid specifically works at that center. And then after a week is up, when everything has been cleaned and sanitized and everything like that, they may rotate through the different centers, which still allows kids opportunities to do those fun things. But now they're just doing them independently within their space. Every student, when they come back in September, beginning 1st through 5th, will have a one-to-one device. Kindergarten will gradually get them as we work through September. So we have to be very vigilant in making sure that, say we have to go virtual at some point in time, that kids understand and know how to use the technology, the platforms that we're using, the teachers will model, and they'll have opportunity to practice. So when it does come time for them to use a Google Classroom or a Google Meet, or to log on to a different website site, they will be able to do confidently. And our hope is that we're going to work with parents to make sure that they understand that process as well, because that can be a very taxing a time when you don't know how to access those things. So we're going to try to do a very good job notifying and keeping parents up to date on those things. As Mr. Miller said, our PE will occur outside the school day, but we will do our very best to get kids outside, social distance safely, so that, you know, some of their learning can occur outside. We're encouraging teachers to take the kids outside to do that ELA or math or writing assignment. So we are going to work very hard to try to, like I said, make learning fun and make kids want to come to school while making sure that the safety is our first and top priority. If we have to go completely remote at some time, I will say it will be much different than what we did in March through June. The expectations will be much tighter. There's going to be more accountability. There's going to be attendance taking. There's going to be grades and assessments, which maybe didn't happen as often last year as it will next year. We're very excited to say that we're getting all of our K-5 population in every single day, which we think is very important. You know, students, we will make sure that they have their breakfast in the morning, they will have a slotted snack time, and they will get to take the lunch home with them as they walk out the door. So I am confident my teachers are working very hard to make this a very positive experience, because I know that kids coming back, it's going to be very different for them. So we have to be very flexible and understanding. And I'm confident that with us working with you and communicating and with the teachers, that it will be a positive experience for everyone.
Thank you, Mrs. Vogt. We're going to now turn to the middle school, and Mr. Abbey is going to speak to us about some of the things that we're considering and looking at for the middle school this fall.
So at the grade 6 level, we are planning to have each student receive in-person instruction 5 days a week for approximately 5 hours a day. Students will be in a cohort of 10 to 12 students that will stay together throughout the entire school day. Teachers will be transitioning between cohorts as opposed to students to minimize exposure between different student cohorts. The day will be split into blocks, in which 2 of those will include face-to-face instruction from core area teachers, for example, an ELA and a social studies on any given day. The remaining blocks of the day will include guided support for the remote learning instruction in the other core areas and special area classes, things such as music, art, STEM, family consumer science, and health. PE instruction will be supported, but most likely the physical activity will happen outside of the school day. When we transition to grade 7, each student will receive in-person instruction for at least 2 days a week for approximately 5 hours a day, with the possibility of some receiving additional in-person support on a 3rd day. During in-person instruction, students are with the same cohort throughout the day, with core area teachers, their math, science, social studies, and ELA teachers transitioning between the cohorts. The remaining days of the week will be spent at home, engaged in remote learning for all core area and special area courses. The current plan for 8th grade students will be very similar to the plan for 7th grade students, with the addition of Spanish as an in-person course. That means that the in-person instruction will be at least 2 days a week for approximately 5 hours a day, with the possibility of some receiving additional in-person support on a 3rd day. Students will still remain in cohorts, and teachers will transition through the day. Students will receive that instruction 2 days a week with that possibility of that 3rd, and the remaining days of the week will be remote learning for all core areas and special area courses. Mandated to close our doors for any length of time, students will engage in remote learning in all of their courses. This will be significantly different between what remote learning looked like in the spring and what it will entail in this current school year. Students will be expected to take part in all learning activities, and there will be substantive teacher-to-student interaction on a daily basis. In order to meet the criteria for earning a unit of study in any course, there needs to be 180 minutes of weekly instruction in any one of those courses. Students will be assessed regularly on the course content and will be held accountable for showing that they have met the learning standards throughout any remote learning time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Abbey. We will now turn to the high school, and Ms. Tomaso will speak to us about some of the things we know about what the high school setting is going to look like this fall.
Thanks, Emily. The remote learning model will be the same as what Mr. Abbey just described for the middle school level. So I will focus on the hybrid level at the high school level. And I thought I would take the approach of what a school day might look like for a Herkimer High School student. So like the 7th and 8th grade students will be in school 2 days a week for 5 hours each day. And this will allow for smaller class sizes that provide for social distancing. Students may order or bring a breakfast to eat in the classroom when they arrive, and they'll be able to take a school lunch to go at dismissal if they so choose. They will take 5 classes each day, although a motivated student might be able to take a 6th elective if it's offered as an online course and if they're able to handle that many courses independently. Outside of school, you can expect your student to have approximately an hour of independent work per subject per week, although there'll be more for Regents level courses and AP level courses, and an hour of substantive interactions with each teacher, which may be through office hours or maybe through a pre-recorded lesson as examples of those interactions. So whereas before in a traditional school day, students might have been able to get work done during a study hall or see their teachers during school hours, they will now have to do that during their remote learning days. With 5 classes, most students will be taking math, science, English, and social studies, and they'll be able to take a 5th class, which may be used to fulfill a graduation requirement, like the fine arts requirement we have students take in 9th grade, or the health requirement we have students take in 10th grade, or perhaps an elective in a subject that interests them. There's so many variables at the high school level that it's impossible to keep a single group of students together for 5 hours straight like you can do in elementary school or even in middle school sometimes. But we will group the students to minimize interactions among the broader population so that they'll only have to switch classes 2 or 3 times in a day. The teacher will switch classrooms whenever possible to help minimize those transitions between classes that, for the students. Some students who need additional services or classes may come to school a 3rd day in the week on the designated remote learning day. An example of this may be a vocational education student who's at BOCES 2 days a week and comes to Herkimer High School for their home-based classes in English and social studies. Perhaps it's a student with an individualized education plan who would need some additional learning supports, and we would like to be able to get those students into school a 3rd day as well so that they get what they need. But in the end, all high school students are working towards 22 credits towards graduation in many different ways. And I'm hoping that this workload of 5 to 6 classes will keep them on track towards that goal without overwhelming them with too many courses to manage effectively. And it will also help them prepare for the learning in their future.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tomaso. The last part of our presentation, we're going to turn to look at how we are preparing to serve our students who receive special education services. And then following this portion of the presentation, we will be looking at some of the questions that have been submitted to us so far. Again, if you're just joining us, you'll see a link at the top of your screen. It begins with slides.app. If you go to that link in another browser window, you'll be able to review some of the questions that have already been submitted and also type in your own. Please do take a look there to see if your question has already been asked. But if you do see that your question has not been addressed, you can go ahead and type that in at any time. And again, we'll be addressing those questions in a few minutes following the end of our presentation.
Thank you, Emily. We will continue to offer special education programs to our students in the least restrictive environment as possible. Our students will continue to receive their programs as well as their OT, PT, speech, and counseling services as outlined in their IEPs while continuing to follow the Department of Health guidelines to ensure the safety of both our providers as well as our students. At this time, we are planning to provide these services face-to-face to our students as we understand how important this time is for our children. For our students who receive their special education programs in an off-site program, such as a BOCES program or at another location, We have not heard any updates to the programming and are anticipating that these programs will continue to run as planned. We will update our families if we have any additional information available as it comes to us. In the event that school goes into a remote phase, we will provide related services such as PT, OT, speech, or counseling via an online platform or other means, and will continue to work with our families to make sure that this works in a way that is convenient for them. We also understand that you may have individual concerns related to your child, and as always, we encourage you to contact the special education office to address these individual concerns, and we will work through these with your family to address these.
Okay, thank you very much. So that concludes our formal presentation for tonight. We're going to spend the rest of our time this evening going through the questions that have been submitted to us. We will be closing this forum by 8:15 p.m. We realize there may still be some questions that we haven't gotten to at that time. If that does happen, we will find a way to answer those questions and share those questions and answers with you if for some reason we can't get to everything while we're speaking here tonight. So many of you have already submitted your questions through that link that's at the top of your screen. Again, if you have not already done so, you can type that link into your browser window, take a look, see if your question already appears there. If it does not, then please feel free to type your question in, and we will just be working through these in the order that they appear on your screen. So the first couple of questions that we received have to do with the extent to which parents have any choice between remote and in-person schooling. Mr. Miller, I hope you can speak to this. I know that that's something we're still maybe looking for some clarity on from the state level, but if you can just address the issue of to what degree there's parent choice involved in that process.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is not enough information to make it a definitive statement. I know that children who have health impairments that make school potentially very unsafe, that we'll work with them like we would work with any other child. But just to simply make the choice to go full remote, I think that's an open question, and there's some disagreement. So I wouldn't be able to give you a definitive answer on that tonight. Okay,
so that's something we will share more information about if and when we learn more from the state guidance. So thank you for that, Mr. Miller. The next question, I'm going to see if Mrs. Vogt can address this because I think this is geared more to the elementary level. So someone wanted to know how we're going to help our younger students successfully follow those safety guidelines. And they asked specifically about situations where a student might be unsupervised, like a bathroom break. Can you speak a little bit about how we'll help keep, our youngest students following those safety guidelines?
I would hope that since March, since we started this, that students have practiced wearing their masks at home. I know that a lot of times you cannot get into a store unless you have a mask on. So I'm hopeful that students know what a mask is, know how to put a mask on when they come to school. Teachers and staff and other students certainly are going to model that behavior because we will all be wearing a mask. We would just continually encourage them to keep the mask on. And if I can see a situation where you have a kindergarten student or a first grader who says, I don't want to wear my mask. Then we have those conversations. What's going on? Why don't you want to wear your mask? Maybe there is an underlying concern or issue that we're not aware of, or maybe the parent's not aware of. So we will, as a school district, obviously all of us are going to be wearing masks. So the hope is that it just becomes very normal to a child after a while. But we will have frequent mask breaks, frequent brain breaks to allow for that child to, quote unquote, resume what they thought maybe was normal, prior to March.
All right, thank you for that. And I know, I'm sure that there's going to be more to come about the guidance and instruction that students are going to be receiving as they come back to school. That'll be age appropriate at different levels. Some of the other questions we got had to do with what could happen, and I'm going to direct this to you, Mr. Miller. In the event of an exposure, how will we know if someone might have been exposed, things like that. I know you mentioned that we would be doing screenings, contact tracing, all of those procedures. Can you just say a little more about how that will work? Just refresh that for people.
Sure. Well, the school won't do contact tracing, and the school won't release protected information. So basically, if we have a confirmed case of COVID-19, it'll be handled like it's handled in a business. We're going to be working with the Department of Health. They're going to do the contact tracing. We just provide them with information about contacts at school, but then the Department of Health would work for a much broader set of contacts for the individuals, and then they would give us guidance about all the procedures and protocols that we would have to go for individuals that were exposed, and they would be the ones that would release information to the public and to the people that needed to have that released.
So in other words, if there was a situation where anyone needed to be quarantined, that quarantine direction would be coming from the health department. It would not be coming from the school.
Correct. The school district has no authority to quarantine anyone.
Right. All right. Thank you for that. This is a question about the hybrid and the possibility of remote learning. I think that's going to be more prevalent at the middle and high school levels. So if Mr. Abbey or Ms. Tomaso could speak to this, there was a question about how those schedules will kind of be worked out. You know, how might it be worked out, what an individual student's schedule would be like as far as the hours that they're in the building or the hours that they're not. Ms. Tomaso, I know you sort of gave like walk through what a day might look like. Can you just come back to that a little bit, revisit that and talk about how it's going to be determined what a student's daily schedule might look like?
I think it gets a little more complicated to explain at the higher levels where students are taking different science classes, different math classes, different electives. But primarily every student needs to take an English and social studies class towards graduation. So that's the core where we're starting at in terms of forming a cohort. And then we can work through the other credits that a student might need to graduate to determine the other members of the cohort. So if a student were in chemistry, we would try to group those students together to be in English and social studies and chemistry as a cohort and have the teacher rotate through them. When you get to the more specialized electives, it gets a little more complicated, and that's where the transitions will have to take place. And the complexities of scheduling that, you know, I can't just spell that out simply, but those electives will help shape the form of a student's schedule, and we will just work to support them getting all the credits that they need to reach their graduation goal.
Okay, so we had a couple other questions about just wanting to clarify about hybrid versus remote learning. So I'm going to put a statement out here, and the people in this room will help me know if I've got it right. We're talking about both hybrid and remote learning because of the possibility that the state of New York could determine that our region could be closed for in-person schooling based on the infection rate. Mr. Miller, is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, the plan right now would be to be in a hybrid model at the high school, middle school of some form or another, and then the elementary grades K through 6 would be in full in-person instruction, with the exception of physical education and band and chorus.
So that's to say that it's not so much that it's on an individual level, it's more what the district will be doing as a whole.
Correct. I mean,
Okay.
we view it as a plan. We're developing a plan to reopen and return as many students as possible to in-person instruction. And our hope would be that every student that can access it, that doesn't have some type of a medical impairment that prevents them from doing so, or a family medical issue that prevents that, would come back to school and in at least the hybrid model or in full and basically full instruction at the elementary. However, we are not in the full driver's seat here. The governor is going to make a decision on August 1st through 7th whether he's going to allow in-person instruction at all. If he doesn't allow in-person instruction at all, then we'll have no choice but to move to a full remote model.
Right, and the duration that might take place is unknown because it's dependent on the infection rates.
The information on any given day that's in Albany.
Correct. We did have a couple more questions about scheduling at the elementary level. And Mrs. Vogt, I think this is something you addressed, but it's possible that someone might have missed this part of the presentation. There was a question about the start and end times of the school day and also about lunch being served. Can you go over that one more time about what we know about that now? And I realize there may still be
Okay.
some uncertainty that we're working to determine about that.
Tentatively, it's could be 8 to 1. We are working on a 5-hour instructional day. And again, kids will be placed in cohorts based, and they'll stay with that cohort for the entire day. And then when they go to board the bus, they will already have a lunch will have been delivered to their classroom if they're taking it home. So they do not even have to go through the lunch line. They will just take their lunch and they'll be placed on the bus.
Great. Okay. We also had a couple of questions that I'm going to direct to Mr. Miller about, and I know we just addressed the issue of contact tracing, quarantining, all of that's going to be handled through the health department. But there are also some questions here about screening. So I was hoping you could repeat what you said previously about how students will be screened and also staff entering the building, what that will look like.
Sure. We are in the process of developing an app for staff, which they'll scan on an iPad as they enter, which will indicate that they have not been exposed. Haven't traveled to any of the states. They'll answer no. If they've answered no to all the questions and they don't have a fever, then they'll be allowed in the building. If they answer yes to any of them, then they'll be directed to talk to the nurse or the school health director. That'll happen every day for all staff members. We will have a general sign off for parents at the beginning of the year that says if you send your child to the bus stop or if you drop your child at school, that you are, in a sense, saying that your child doesn't have a fever and you're answering no to all the questions, the COVID-4 questions. And that'll get your child in the door. Once they're in the door, nearly daily, depending on arrival time, I could see it slipping through the cracks. But generally, at the beginning of the day, they're going to have their temperature checked again by staff members. And then if their temperature is elevated, all that means is that they'll go to the nurse for an evaluation. So staff members won't evaluate. They're just going to do a yes, no on the temperature check, and then they'll go to the nurse, and the nurse will do an evaluation if necessary.
Okay, thank you. We also had a few questions about some of the high school coursework that I'm going to ask Ms. Tomaso about. And I don't know if we know the answer to this yet, but we had a few questions about whether students will be able to leave the school for things like BOCES or Project Lead the Way. Can you speak to that?
Well, let me start with the BOCES Career Tech Program. And our students in 11th and 12th grade pursue vocational studies at the Webb Complex on Gross Boulevard. And students who are enrolled in those programs will attend the technical portion of their program over at BOCES. And as it stands now, and the thing is, things change as our plans evolve. So this plan could change too. But right now, it appears that the juniors would be going for 2 days for their CTE instruction, and the seniors would be going for 2 different days for their CTE instruction. So the Herkimer students who take CTE classes at Herkimer BOCES would be there for the 2 days of the week, learning their skills and preparing for future careers. They still, however, have courses that they need to take at their home school, which is here in Herkimer. And for us, we intend to have those CTE students come to our building with their cohort to take the English and social studies and whatever other credits they might need towards graduation in our building on what would normally be a remote learning day for other students. We will schedule it so that they are here for their in-person instruction with their Herkimer teachers on one of our remote learning days. So the BOCES students who are taking career technical education will be in our building for those core classes and electives, but will still be taking their technical courses at the Webb Complex 2 days a week.
Okay, thank you.
The other ones, I think you had mentioned Project Lead the Way. We haven't advanced far enough in our discussions to determine what those will look like. And once we have our own home base plan worked out, we'll coordinate with other districts to see what the possibilities are.
Great. So more to come on
More
that,
to come.
as with many of these things. We had a couple questions that I'm going to direct to Mr. Miller about what will be provided for students as far as masks, hand sanitizer. Can you speak to that?
The expectation and the regulations is that the face covering is provided by the home. However, buses will have disposable masks to ensure that a child that's at the bus stop will be able to get on even if they don't have a face covering. And we will work with families that for some reason can't provide their child with a face covering. The hand sanitizer question, we won't provide hand sanitizer directly to children, but there'll be hand sanitizer at all the entries. There'll be hand sanitizer dispensers or either hand sanitizer dispensers mounted on the wall or containers in every classroom.
Great, thank you. I'm turning back to Ms. Tomaso for this question. I have another question here about high school. There's a question here about attendance and accountability for remote learning. I think you spoke to that a little bit in your presentation, but for someone who might have missed that, can you just address that again about what do we know about what that will look like as far as how we will look at attendance and accountability for those portions of learning that are going to be remote?
Yeah, I had just piggybacked on what Mr. Abbey had said, describing it, so I can understand that I didn't fully say it at the high school level because it's pretty much the same thing. Our students are required to have 180 minutes of substantive contact time during the week of a class. So while it's not seat time per se in the hybrid model, because in the hybrid model, students are learning both at home and at school. So we are giving them as much, we're meeting the requirements for the substantive contact time with the teachers, but in addition, providing remote activities, remote learning lessons to add to that. Students will be required to participate in those activities, to attend school on their attendance days, to participate in the remote learning activities on their remote learning days, and their participation in those activities will count towards their attendance. So in addition, the grading policies of the teachers will be spelled out from the beginning and carried through the hybrid model. So the grading will be different than our last remote learning experience in that we will have already established what those grades come from and what the student expectations are in a hybrid learning environment. So unlike before, when we were kind of thrown into a remote learning situation, not knowing when it would end and not prepared for the things like attendance and grades, we're going into this much more prepared, having learned from our experiences. And attendance will matter, student participation will matter, and grades are a part of this learning experience. So even though we called it remote learning before and we call it remote learning now, our accountability system is much more forward-looking now, and both the teachers know what to expect and students know what to expect moving forward in this format.
Great, thank you. I have another question for Mr. Miller about transportation. We spoke about, we're going to have limited capacity on our school buses, that we encourage parents who are able to transport their students to school. There was a question about whether older students would be permitted to drive themselves to school.
Older students already do drive themselves to school. So yeah, there is a sign-off permission slip that I believe we worked through the principal's office, but that would probably be, Ms. Tomaso probably has a better handle on how that works.
Yeah, I apologize. Ms. Tomaso, if you want to add anything to that, has anything changed about how that determination is made if the student can self-transport to school, drive their own vehicle to school?
There's requirements in terms of filing paperwork with us and letting us know and getting permission to do that. But students will continue to be able to drive themselves to school.
Okay, thank you. We had a few questions, and I think this was addressed about kindergarten and pre-K, but maybe we can come back to that. A few people had asked about the BOCES pre-kindergarten program. Can you say anything about what we know about the continuation of that program at this point?
One of the things that's holding up making a determination about TPK, which is the BOCES program, and UPK, and the expanded pre-K program, which are throughout the Valley, most schools have them, is that usually by now those grants are submitted and approved, but those funds have not even, the allocations for those funds have not even been released by the state as of yet. So certainly the funding for TPK, I think, is in question, and the funding for UPK and expanded pre-K are all questions that the districts are hesitant to talk about too much right now, and don't know. Like, again, it's an uncertain thing. Also, one of the things that's spelled out in the 145-page document, which is, it's easy to miss, is that in the pre-K section, it changes the teacher to student ratio from 8 right now. Before this year, it would have been 18 students, 1 teacher, 1 aide, or 1 LTA. So that's a 18-1-1 ratio. Now the ratio under the COVID guidelines is 8 students and 1 teacher. So in order to keep our current, if we pre-K, we would have had, instead of 3 pre-K teachers, we would have had, I think, about 7 or 8 pre-K teachers, would almost double the number of pre-K teachers we would have needed to support the program. There's other things that when we create a UPK program, we have to offer it to everyone who comes. So we can't just offer pre-K to 8 students. If there's 40 students that want it, we're supposed to technically offer it to all or none. And really, at this point, financially, we really can't make that decision to offer it to all. So we've made a decision to move to a virtual program to service all students this year. But TPK, that's a BOCES run program, and they don't have an answer for me as of yet.
Okay, so more to come on that as we learn more about the continuation of those programs. We have had some questions, and I asked a little bit about this in a previous question about student scheduling. We have some questions from people. Maybe they have students at different age levels. Maybe they have 1 student at the elementary level, 1 student at the high school level. I think they're trying to get a sense of how those students' schedules might or might not line up. And some of these questions have to do with childcare, right? If a parent has to work outside the home. I think there are some concerns about if my child is not in school for the duration of the day that we had previously done, what options are available. Mr. Miller, I know that in the spring, we had provided some information to families about childcare options that were available. Do you know if that is going to continue to be available? Can you speak to that at all?
I'm fairly certain that we're going to still have to maintain a child care plan, which is a resource on our website, which provides a number to gain access to where there are open child care slots in this region. We're aware of that issue. Currently, elementary release at about 2:30, and high school release probably by the time the buses get there closer to 3 o'clock, 2:45, 3 o'clock. We don't see that gap getting a lot larger. It might be a little bit larger this year by about 30 minutes instead of 15 minutes, the gap between when high school kids and elementary kids, and it'll be earlier in the day. The issue, if we start the elementary day earlier than the high school day, and if we let the high school students out sooner, then there'll be a gap in the morning where the older children aren't home. So we really run into, if the days are the same length, and they're going to be staggered at one end or the other, that older children won't be home when the younger children would be there. So we'll run into issues both ways. But we're going to try to keep them as close together as we can because we are aware of that issue.
Great, thank you. I have a few more questions about transportation. I think this is something we addressed previously, but I just want to come back to it for someone who may have missed it. And this is about the elementary school level. One of these questions is about what age does a student have to be to get permission to walk themselves home? Can you address that?
If I haven't spoken with Bernie this school year, which I know that they have had conversations with their own opening committee. In the past, it's been anybody first grade and older. So if you were a kindergartner, you had to have a parent waiting for you at the bus stop unless a parent wrote a note stating that their kindergartner could walk with their older child. So at this point, I still think that's in effect. I have heard nothing otherwise, but I can certainly follow up on that.
Okay, so more to come on that. I'm just looking through these questions and taking a moment here. We have addressed a lot of the questions that have come up already, but one that has come up recurrently is questions about masks. I wonder if Mr. Crandall or Mr. Miller can speak in a little more depth about what the state guidance tells us and what we are required to do as far as compliance with masks. Some of the questions suggested, is this a choice or is this really a rule? Sort of questioning how strict the guidance is around mask wearing. Is there anything you can say about that? I know it's complex, but if we can speak a little bit about the guidance that we've gotten for wearing masks, I think that would be helpful.
Can we take that, Mr. Crandall? I think that there are, in the regulations, there are spots where it says when possible, if you're able, those words are slid into the guidance so that I can have two students walk down the hall and maybe for a brief moment, they're going to be 4 feet apart. But the guidance suggests the definition of social distancing is 6 feet. If you're within 6 feet, you're not socially distanced. And they know inadvertently when we have 500 kids or 550 kids and 100 staff members at the elementary, we wouldn't, if we had a hard and fast rule that said, no, you will always be 6 feet apart. Like that was like, if you broke that rule, you're in trouble. We're gonna shut you down. Well, they can't write the guidelines that way. They have to write the guidelines in such a way that it lets me pass by a student in the hallway in the middle of 2 lines with my face covering. I'm gonna breach that distance. So that's why that language is there. And when you talk to the safety experts that we bring in from BOCES or from the state, they're gonna look at our classroom and they're gonna take out measuring tapes and they're gonna say a socially distanced classroom has students in stations at desks that are 6 feet apart facing the same direction. That's what they're gonna tell us. That's when we're gonna be allowing them to remove their masks, but encourage them still to wear them, because even at 6 feet, it's still better if you're in the room with someone for 5 hours that everyone wore a mask. So I know there's a lot of controversy out there among the people that wrote the regulations and now the people that are trying to interpret them and trying to run school systems that were never designed to have people 6 feet apart and to have people 12 feet apart for PE and music. When you look at those and you say, how do I run the school this way? It's very, very difficult and nearly impossible in some districts. So I think there's some pressure from the administrators to try to get more students into a classroom to pierce that 6 foot distance. And I think that's not the intent of the guidelines at all. The intent of the guidelines is that classrooms are going to be set up to maintain 6 feet social distance if you want to have the children remove the mask at all. So, and in general, that's the way it should be done. And there probably is a myth out there that we can just have people wear masks and preach the distance. And that's not really true either. You should still, even with the mask, try to maintain the 6 feet social distance. I don't know if Mr. Crandall, if you wanted to add anything to that or.
No, I think that was very well spoken.
Great. Thank you for that. And I know, again, there's going to be more, I think, probably direct guidance to families as we get closer to the return to school about the details of mask wearing. Some of these questions we've gotten are pretty specific, so I think we'll have more of those answers as we get closer to opening the doors for fall. But just to emphasize the point that this is all guided by the guidance that the state has given us about wearing masks and maintaining social distance. We've gotten through a lot of the questions that have been submitted so far. And again, for anyone who has joined this presentation a little later on, I know some people have commented that they didn't see maybe the beginning of this presentation. There were some portions they missed. I do want to let you know that we will be recapping the full presentation on our website in the coming days. So if there were some of these details that you missed, this was not your only chance to hear this information. We will be sharing more of this information with you in the days and the weeks to come as we get closer to the start of school and as we know more about our plans for reopening and the guidance that we're receiving from the state. So I know, again, a few people have commented that they missed some of the presentation. Just wanted to reassure you that there will be an opportunity to watch the full video through if that's something you want to do, but we will also have information coming out on our website about a lot of the topics and the questions that have been discussed today. We do have a few more questions here about the health screening screenings. Mr. Miller, could you go over once more what our expectation is for parents before they send their child in for a school day, and maybe talk through, a scenario of, and I think you went through this before, of if a child did present with symptoms or anything like that upon arriving at school. What can you say about that?
So essentially, when a parent sends a child to school, they're assuring us that they don't have a fever, that they haven't traveled to a hotspot, that they don't have any of the signs or symptoms of COVID-19 or any other illness. And basically, they're going to sign off at the beginning of the year that that's the contract they have with us, that when they send them, that they're going to pass the screening test that all the staff take as well. When children arrive at school, we will take the temperature of every children upon arrival, and that'll be done at the classroom level. If a child has a fever, or if the child thermometer says they have a fever, sometimes if a kid's running down the hallway or has been out in the hot, they can momentarily spike a fever. So then they'll be assessed. After that, they'll be assessed by the nurse, or the nurse will do an assessment. That's the only person in our building, in either building, that can actually do an assessment, a health assessment. If the nurse deems that there needs to be further action, then that would be handled by the health office. And at that point, we haven't fully developed all the protocols associated with sending a child home or return to school for staff and students as of yet, but we're working on those procedures, and we'll have those procedures fully vetted with the Department of Health before school starts.
Great, thank you. And again, just to restate, I know this came up previously, but any of that notification of exposure or anything like that, that's all going to be taking place by the Department of Health. That's not something that's going to be the responsibility of the school district. I'm just looking through some more of the questions that have been submitted. There are some questions that we're getting that are like more fine detail about the school day schedule, the start times and end times. I know we've gone over that. And I do just want to let people who are on the call know that we will be sharing that information with you in more detail in the days and weeks to come. So I know there's been some questions about that. I don't want you to think that I'm ignoring those questions here, or that we're ignoring them. We will be providing you with more detailed information about those start and end times of the school day in the days and weeks to come. But I know we're also still working on firming up that information. So there will be more to come on that. There was a question here about athletics. That's something we haven't talked about today. So I was going to see if Mrs. Paraguay could speak to what we know now about athletics for the upcoming school year.
Sure. The fall sports are slated to start September 21st. However, if the sports seasons are interrupted or impacted by COVID-19, and we cannot start on the 21st, then a condensed seasons plan will be implemented, with winter sports beginning in January, followed by fall sports in March. So we just await more information from the state.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And if we do have any more questions or information coming out about athletics in the days and weeks to come, we'll be sharing that with families. I know we talked about the fact that the fully remote scenario is one that would be determined not really at the local level, but at the state level, if our region was shut down, so to speak, and if we were directed to turn to fully remote learning. But there were a few questions about how that would work. One question that was asked, and I guess Mr. Miller, you would probably be best positioned to answer this because they didn't specify a grade level, about who would be teaching a fully remote option. And I think that would also potentially be a question about if there was a student who was medically compromised who was not able to come to in-person instruction. Can you say a little bit about how that would work?
Sure. And then how it works and how it's implemented would probably be a local determination. If, for instance, we have 2 or 3 at each grade level or at several grade levels that require remote instruction for health reasons, then we may collaboratively in the Valley all have that situation. And then we might look at a collaborative effort through BOCES to deliver virtual instruction at multiple grade levels. If the problem is larger in our district, not problem, if the number of students that are required to have that is larger, the larger the number gets, the more likely it is that we would try to find an internal solution. So there's some kind of a tipping point when we have enough students to justify an internal solution instead of a regional solution for online learning or for remote learning. So I would say that there could be multiple different ways that remote learning is provided next year. Sometimes it might be through a collaborative effort through Herkimer County BOCES. Other times it might be local because there's the right number of students to justify doing it locally. As most of our decisions, the reason that we have a broad number of out-of-district special ed programs is that we try to find the right program for the child so that the child can be successful. We would look at this similarly for virtual learning and make sure that we try to find the best possible outcome for the children.
Thank you. So in other words, part of what you're saying is that it's going to depend a little bit on what happens and also what the needs of our students are. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
So if I had 50 students every year that wanted Mandarin Chinese, I would probably have Mandarin Chinese in our building. If I have 2 children that do it, I might seek a remote or distance learning opportunity to get that program here. So this is a very similar problem to me. It doesn't look any different, but to parents, they might be broadly encountering this differently. I get why that's a question.
Speaking as we were of remote learning, and I realize this is a question we may not have an answer to, but I wanted to just mention it anyway because it did come up in the questions here. There was a question about families who may not have internet access at home and wanting to know what remote learning might look like for them. Can you speak at all to that question? Because I know that's something that we're aware is an issue. Some families don't have internet access at home. I think so, yeah. I think that's for Mr. Miller.
I know that last year during the closure from mid-March to the end of June, we worked with many, many families with internet issues, either capacity issue, because sometimes if you have 3 or 4 children on your service, they're using so much bandwidth that it's really difficult for them to do it. So sometimes they might have needed to seek extra access from us, and I think we were able to provide that. And then there's sometimes rural places that have difficulty with internet, and we've developed a system over multiple years pre-COVID to provide internet to homes of children that don't have it access there. I don't know. Mr. Aurelio might have a better idea about whether we've reached everybody or not, or whether there's still some gaps. What's that? You want to take my phone?
Okay. So one of the things that we did do fairly successfully while we closed in the spring was we got a number of internet-enabled devices out to families and students who were in need. And we plan to continue that program this fall. We have a number of devices and a number of students and families who have already reached out to us to request help in getting internet access. Now, obviously, hotspots aren't able to cover everyone who doesn't have access. There's always someone who lives somewhere where there is no cell coverage. So in those instances, there are other organizations that we can help a community member or a parent connect with to see if that is a way to get them low cost or at some cases no cost internet. So outside of providing hotspots to folks, really for anyone who's experiencing connectivity issues or technology issues, we're really going to work with them on a one-to-one basis and help them, get whatever we can, help in any way we can to, provide whatever we can to help support your kids' education.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Aurelio. We just have a few minutes left before we're going to wrap up for the evening. I know there are still some questions that we may not have addressed here tonight. Again, we are going to make every effort to answer all the questions in some form that will probably be shared via the website for anything that we're not able to address tonight. Some of that, again, is because these plans are still being developed. We're still waiting on guidance on a number of issues. So there are some things we don't have the answers for you tonight that we will have in the days and the weeks to come. But if there are also answers that pop up here at the end of our time in this forum, we're going to make every effort to answer those for you publicly in the days and weeks to come. So just a few more questions before we wrap up. For Mr. Miller, there was a question here about students going to see the nurse. I know you addressed this previously. There are some really detailed questions about what the setup of the nurse's office is going to be like. I believe you said previously that those are plans that are still being developed. Is that correct?
That's correct. One of the regulations is that you have to have a separate location for children that are ill from children that are healthy. So some children go to the nurse's office for multiple reasons that don't have to do with illness. And so we will have to revamp how our health offices are set up. And I know the nurses are working on that plan now. We will have a second location, at least, for the nurse's office.
Okay, thank you. The next question I'm going to direct to you as well.
Okay,
So
I'm
you
going
can
to leave it
unmuted.
right off mute.
I know you spoke in your presentation about cleaning and disinfecting that would happen in the school buildings. Can you say a little bit more about that, about what we know at this point, about what they might look like, in what ways that might be different from the standard cleaning procedures we might have had in the past?
Sure, and I may or may not know all the technical terms for the devices that we've been in the process of purchasing. We actually had purchased several deionizing cleaners that like spray like some kind of ionized solution at touch surfaces, and it kills bacteria and germs. We've had these. If you see they look like stormtroopers when they got the pack on their back and they're going around and they're pointing at the handles of the doors, and they've been doing that for years. Pre-COVID, we were doing that because we schools have dealt with communicable diseases for years. Like, this is not new to schools, whether it's strep throat, head lice, you guys know all the flu, the cold. I mean, things go through schools, and our nurses are experts at dealing with that. And COVID is different because of its broad impact on society, but our school nurses and our systems are really pretty good at handling communicable diseases and reducing spread. But with this, we're going to take it more seriously, and we are going to clean with those same deionizing guns that we have. We're getting bigger devices that can clean larger spaces much quicker. So we'll go through a cleaning process, and then we'll go through a room and disinfect it even after it's been cleaned with this disinfecting solution. And we're going to do that every night. We'll also have our cleaners and custodians and probably outdoors people doing more touch surface work with those deionizing guns. And we'll be logging cleaning. That is, that we'll make sure that cleaning is actually taking place by having cleaners log that they've cleaned sites. And I wish I had Jim here, but Jim's on vacation and he could talk more detail about some of the stuff that we're doing next semester. We've also installed the highest rated filter we can, or in the process of installing the highest rated filter we can in all our air handling systems. You may have seen something on the news about an AR13 filter, and excuse me if I got the acronym wrong, but if we put the AR13 in our filters, they're so thick, and so we can't move enough air through the filters. It will be bad for our filters. But we're going to go from like an R7 to an R9A. That's the highest we can put in our system, and we'll do that and hope that that's helpful. And down the road, if SED comes out with some proper guidance on some of these air handling systems and some of the cleaning systems, we can install those down the road. But right now, we're just really going to be looking at touch surfaces, looking at minimizing. We're all working together by minimizing cohort size, by minimizing the amount of people I'm mixing. We're going to minimize the amount of cleaning that we have to do because we're not going to be as occupied as we were as well. So we were always pretty good at the cleaning process, and we're going to be better next year and more rigid and more routine.
Great, thank you. Just one or two more questions before we wrap up our live questions for this evening. And this is a question about the elementary school pickup and drop off. And Mrs. Vogt, you may have addressed this when you were speaking earlier, but one person wanted to know if parents will be allowed to enter the school building to pick up their students at the elementary school. Can you speak to what we know about those procedures right now? And I realize they may still be being developed.
I would say they're still being developed. We know the number of parents who drop off who don't enter the building, but at the end of the day, we're aware of the high volume number of parents who, congregate in the vestibule, which obviously will not be allowed. So we are working with our committee members on coming up with a system or procedure to streamline that.
Great, thank you. So more information to come about those really specific pickup and drop off procedures as we get closer to the start of school. I think we probably have time for maybe one or two more questions, and I'm just looking through to see what we may have missed. This is a question probably for the middle or high school level, so I'll let the two of you kind of think about who you want to answer it. There was a question about for remote schooling, for that learning that will be done remotely. What do we know about the extent to which there might be like Zoom classrooms or interactive online spaces where the kids and the teacher can see one another in real time? Can you say anything about kind of what we know about the shape of that right now or the extent to which that's still being developed?
So I think that those types of interactions are something that we're going to expect, on a daily basis. Anytime that a student is in remote, whether it's just their off day in the hybrid model or if we're in full remote, we're expecting that daily interaction between the student and the teacher. The platform or the way that that's being done, I think, depends on the lessons that are currently going on. I think that there's going to be office hours in which a teacher is available so that students know that during this chunk of time, I can have contact with my math teacher so that I can get the support that I need in that particular content area. I think that's one way that it's going to happen. I think that there's going to be times in which teachers are going to want to set up small groups for discussion or debate. I think that there's going to be times where that daily interaction is an exchange of an assignment or a response to a reading or a video. So I don't think that it's necessarily always going to be the same way, but I think that that interaction is going to be regular and occurring for each teacher and each student. And sometimes it'll be in groups and sometimes it'll be more on a small group or individual basis.
All right, thank you. And the last question that we'll go over tonight and is also for the middle and high school building. And again, you may have addressed this when you spoke earlier, but for anyone who didn't hear us address this, there was a question about lockers. If anything is going to be different in the way that students are using their lockers. Again, I don't know if we know that yet, but if there's anything we know about that, there was a question about that too. So.
Lockers are definitely something that we have been discussing. At this time, I think that it is unlikely that we will use lockers, but it's not something that we're saying definitively no yet. With having lockers, there is significantly more interaction, and the proximity of the lockers obviously causes a huge concern as well. So how we could assign a locker to a student and still maintain proper social distancing is something that we don't have an answer to yet. What we need to work around then is streamlining the materials that students are bringing with and home on a daily basis to make sure that our classrooms are not becoming cluttered and we're able to maintain that social distancing in the classroom as well.
All right, so that's something that's still in the works, and we'll have more information presumably for our middle and high school parents about how students can store their belongings as we get closer to the start of the school year. We are coming now to the end of our time. We are still getting some questions coming in, so I just want to let everyone on the call know that we will be addressing the questions that have come up tonight on our website, and that a recording of this forum will also be available for you to view in the coming days. I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight, for asking these questions, and for hearing what we had to say. Again, this isn't the last time we'll be talking about these things. We'll have more information for all of you about a lot of the things we spoke about here this evening in the days and the weeks to come as we finalize our plans and as we learn more about the guidance that's directing some of these decisions. So again, just want to thank everyone for their participation in this forum tonight. We really appreciate your input. And please watch our website, listen for our phone calls. We will be in touch in the days and weeks to come also to find out about things like transportation needs. So please be listening for that phone call from the district. Certainly, I know over the summer we've called you a lot of times, but we appreciate your attention to those messages. And we will be reaching out to learn more about your family's transportation needs. So this concludes our forum this evening. We thank you for your attention and your participation. We hope you have a good evening, and good night.